So the problem was around this time, the artists who had little control as it was were beginning to lose what control they did have. So this was when the studio system that gripped Hollywood for decades was just starting to form. But one straw in particular that broke Mary Pickford's back was the process of vertical integration, which is what I'm here to talk to all of you about today. Vertical integration. And I will be asking for money after for all of you to invest in my vertical integration scheme. This was the process of the movie studios buying up companies so that they were gaining control of not only just how the movies were made by owning a movie studio with sound stages, but now also the distribution and the exhibition in the form of buying theaters and making their own chains of theaters so that they were making as much money as possible at every single step of the process.
Something
mononucleosis. That's right. That was what you got.
They tell you not to do that legally. It's illegal.
That's why I didn't kiss anybody in high school.
That's what it was.
The Supreme Court told me not to. Sorry, ladies. I know you all want to smooch you. I was that hot guy you were talking about.
And we're like, I hope he hooks up with that girl.
As your hand was stuck in the locker because I put it there. So now they controlled every part of a movie, from the creation of the idea by one of their staff writers who was just a typewriter to them, to the movie-going experience of the public in one of their movie theaters. Part of this consolidation of power process was something known as, here's my other buzz term, block booking.
Whoa.
Can all of you spell that? Which was when the movie studios would force the theater owners of the theaters they didn't own to buy movies to show from their studio in bulk. Meaning that if you wanted the new Mary Pickford movie, you also had to buy a dozen crappy movies that the studio would churn out as cash grabs.
Right.
So this not only ensured that the movies they were making, which was, like you said, an absurd amount of movies, were going to be seen and make money, but also it made sure these theaters were playing movies from their studio and nobody else's, because they had so many movies, there was barely enough time in the day to show all of these movies. Like if you want to show this one Mary Pickford movie at 6 o'clock, for the other 23 hours of the day, you've got to be showing our crap movies.
Yeah. And I know that most of it is just homeless people sleeping in this theater, but you gotta show up for Baby's Bottom. It falls out of the onesie.
The hit movie inspired by the suntan lotion bottle. Movies that barely anybody were going to see, and even fewer people were going to like these movies. Right. So this infuriated people like Mary Pickford because she felt it was diluting her work by giving the public 1 part Mary Pickford, 12 parts whatever no-name actor who died 90 years ago who nobody remembers or even knew back then.
Right.
For the sake of art, it offended her by encouraging and facilitating mediocre filmmaking in movies that were basically just movie theater schedule padding, but it also offended her wallet.
Which is the most offensive. I got a family to take care of.
Yeah, I've got a series of alcoholic husbands I've got to look after. The studios were making money off of her name, and she was not getting what she felt was her fair share, even though she's making more money.
An obscene amount of money.
If we want to do the calculations, even at her beginning salary, I'm making the equivalent in 2022.
I'm making the same amount of money an 8-year-old actress at 1908 was making.
Not adjusted for inflation.
Not adjusted for inflation, straight up.
Movie theaters wouldn't be paying all that money for a man in a hat buys a turkey or whatever other trash.
Ooh, they put a turkey one out though?
Oh, is that part of Friends? Did he put the turkey on his head when they're all dancing in the fountain? In the fountain, the title card just shows like musical notes. So whatever other trash they were churning out, movie theaters wouldn't be paying that if it weren't required by the studio so that they could also show a Mary Pickford movie. But Mary Pickford wasn't the only one offended by this. Much poorer people were as well.
What's that matter?
Long forgotten by history, the poor people were also offended by this, namely the independent movie theater owners. The first reaction to the practice of block booking was the formation of the First National Cooperative, which started in 1917 as 26 small theater owners who banded together to stand up to movie studios by saying, we will only pay for the movies we want to show.
Right.
And by 1918, there were over 600 theaters that were a part of this group. And of course, as is kind of the theme of this story, it wasn't long before they decided to become the beast that they were fighting against. Yeah. These theater.
I've got an idea. Let's all group together and make one big company to stamp out that one big company. And
then the theaters who are smaller than us, they'll have to buy all of our crappy movies. They decided to start making movies of their own to show at their theaters and became an independent movie studio themselves, but they weren't going to be like the other guys, they swear.
Yeah.
Mary was, of course, behind their crusade, so she signed with them to make $1.3 million a year and, more importantly, complete control of her movies.
Yeah.
It wasn't long before her good friend and high school connoisseur, Charlie Chaplin, and a guy who like I said, now I understand how they're connected. I didn't get it before, but D.W. Griffith.
That's right. Old pal. We came up together.
Yeah. He just came out of nowhere and was like, you, me, we're going.
And then it comes out of a bush. Do you guys like Birth of a Nation? What about Intolerance?
You just see like a pointy Klan hat sticking out of a bush. D.W., have you been eavesdropping on me and Douglas Fairbanks having an affair?
I couldn't tell if that was you or just a burning cross.
That's how you know I'm coming. The most famous director of the time who solidified the form of what movies are today and also made Birth of a Nation that reinvigorated the KKK and empowered another century or more of racist white supremacists, D.W. Griffith.
That's him.
So Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith all work for First National now. They weren't a traditional studio with a backlot. They just distributed movies made by other people.
Okay.
That's why Charlie Chaplin opened his studio on La Brea in 1918, because he hated the studios he was working for who wouldn't give him everything he wanted. So he made his own to make movies the way he wanted to, and First National would distribute them for him. That's how that studio
what that was.
That's what that was. That explains why Kermit the Frog's on top.
It
was a metaphor. Things seemed to go well for a couple of years, but then in January 1919, the executives of First National all gathered at the Alexandria Hotel downtown for a very important meeting.
That's where Max Sennett blew his wad so he could get a bathtub.
Yeah, that's where big old Max Sennett and his Keystone Cops were. I have my own security.
You got to defund the Keystone Cops.
At this meeting, Charlie Chaplin asked the executives for a larger budget for one of his movies. They refused it, which to him went directly against their promise of supporting their artists, and that was it with him and First National.
I thought you were the Tramp. You need more money? That's not in character.
Yeah, the Tramp, who's known for being rich. It's in the name.
You're doing pretty good without money.
These are my real shoes. But aside from Charlie Chaplin not getting his way, there was something even bigger afoot at this meeting. So big that Chaplin, Griffith, Pickford, and her new pal, Douglas Fairbanks,
just friends,
they hired Pinkertons to infiltrate this meeting to confirm the rumor that First National was planning to merge with Paramount.
Wow.
And the Pinkertons confirmed it. They were. What that meant was that the supposed studio that was fighting for the little guy was becoming one of the big guys, and that also meant one less studio in an industry that was becoming more and more of a monopoly.
Yeah.
Like everything, like kind of like how things are now. Like Disney owns everything. Mm-hmm. They were all just turning into one giant studio. Mary Pickford was able to get the control and salary she wanted by pitting studios against each other to offer her more for her star power, and by making it so that there was no competition to pit against each other to spark like a bidding war for Mary Pickford. This was just another chance for the studios to take advantage of her.
Right.
So that was it for her also. She's done with First National. So to discuss the situation, Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford, I don't think Douglas Fairbanks was there, and apparently her mom, they all met at Charlie Chaplin's brother's house. Now the idea is always attributed to Mary Pickford, but it seems it also came with the help of Ben Schulberg, who was the sales chief for Famous Players Lasky and also the dad of the guy who wrote What Makes Sammy Run.
Oh, okay.
So it was sort of like both of their ideas, Mary Pickford and this guy.
Okay.
But the idea was for a new studio owned by the artists themselves. Not lawyers, not businessmen, actors. A place where movie stars weren't just employees of someone who wore a suit and tie, which actors did too, but like it was a more formal suit and tie.
So did barbers and sign painters, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah. So, I mean, the guy selling corn on the side of the street was wearing a suit and tie, so I guess it doesn't mean much. But his suit and tie, it was made of wood. This would mean more artistic control and better profits for the artists themselves. It would give them the freedom to make the movies they wanted the way they wanted to make them. The risk of this was that everyone involved would have to put their own money on the line to make these movies, which was no small thing because other actors had tried before to do this sort of thing, and it ruined all of them, and nobody remembers any of their names. It was a reverse Cheers. What made this different, though...
Cheers. It's like 1919, and we have to fight for the integrity of the movies, and it's just like, man fixes car.
What happened to the days when a train coming at you could scare everybody? Horror movies have not been as scary as that. Nosferatu? No, Nosferatu.
Yes, Nosferatu.
What made this different, though, was that this had never been tried by names this big before.
Right.
Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith. four of the biggest names in Hollywood at the time, and four of the biggest names still of all time. The Big Four, as they were called. It was originally five because William S. Hart was part of the planning in the early stages, but he dropped out because famous players offered him $200,000 a movie, and that was A-okay to him. Nothing to rage against here.
I think he has a museum in Newhall that I
think he owned like all. I think everything north of James Cagney's ranch was just William S. Hart's. It was William S. Hart and Harry Carey, and the sitcom that could have been.
Oh, that's one of the many iterations of The Odd Couple.
Your ranch is 500 acres away from mine. What antics will they get into? They also had their trusty lawyer William Gibbs McAdoo.
Ooh, what's a good name?
He was the former Secretary to the Treasury of the United States and Woodrow Wilson's son-in-law. So this is like the four crazy big celebrity names, and then Woodrow Wilson's son-in-law are all coming together. So on February 5th, 1919, the United Artists Corporation was officially formed, becoming the first major production company controlled by artists.
Right.
Their mission was to protect the exhibitor and the industry from itself. And they declared, "We think that this step is positively and absolutely necessary to protect the great motion picture public from threatening combinations and trusts that would force upon them mediocre productions and machine-made entertainment." So they really were like, it was all about the money, but they were...
But they hard emphasis on artists of United Artists.
They wanted movies to be good.
Yeah, they saw a vision of like what they could do with this
and
media,
make a lot of money.
And also make a lot of money doing it.
Their critics called it a rebellion against established producing and distributing arrangements, and Richard Rowland, head of Metro Pictures, famously said, "The inmates are taking over the asylum." That was the narrative going on.
Right. The America's sweethearts are running the asylum.
Yeah. America's sweethearts and derelicts are running the asylum. It was a very forward-thinking movement towards empowering artists and sharing profits, not just among the people on the top floor, but with everybody involved. So here's how it was going to work. First off, they banned block booking. Each of the big four would own 25% of the company, and to fill a full release schedule to keep everything afloat, each of the four had to release 5 movies a year. Now here's how it actually worked. Not like that. For one person to put out 5 movies a year, even back then, was absurd.
Right.
On top of that, most of them in these first few years was still under contracts with other studios that they had to follow through with before they were free. So even if somehow they could put out 5 movies in 1 year, most or all of them would have to go to another studio, at least at the beginning. Charlie Chaplin alone owed First National 5 movies, and he made movies notoriously slow. Plus, he, as well as everyone else in Hollywood, were moving away from shorts, which were going out of fashion, to 90-minute movies, which were obviously harder and took a lot longer to make than a 50-minute movie.
If I may say, shorts never go out of fashion. They're always sort of comfortable to wear. Short films.
If you're a child, yeah, but if you want to look professional, you've got to have a 10-reeler.
I've seen people on golf courses wear shorts and look great.
I've seen a former president wear shorts on a golf course, and he looked pretty fine.
Sure, they were backwards.
He's so fine. And Douglas Fairbanks was mostly interested in doing big budget costume and effects spectaculars, which took forever. So the 5 movies a year per person plan was abandoned very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Then they tried to bump it down to 4 each, and they couldn't even do that. So they bumped it down to 1 a year, and they couldn't even do that.
Oh my God.
The first movie made during the United Artists time from this group was Broken Blossoms by D.W. Griffith in 1919, but that one was the property of famous players, so that didn't really count. So the first United Artists original movie came out October 24th, 1919, His Majesty the American, starring Douglas Fairbanks, with a small role played by Boris Karloff as Frankenstein. His Majesty the Frankenstein. His Majesty the Frankenstein monster. Then came Mary's Pollyanna and Chaplin's The Woman of Paris, which did not star Charlie Chaplin and didn't come out until 1923. So that's 4 years after they started.
Okay.
So throughout the 20s, Doug and Mary were doing about 1 movie a year for United Artists, but Chaplin and Griffith were doing much less than that. To fill these gaps that surprised temperamental artists were leaving in the release schedule, they had to bring in other people to fill the gaps. And to do that, they needed some of those dreaded non-artistic types they were trying to get away from.
Right.
This wasn't an easy pitch to people because most producers had contracts already with other studios, much like the actors did at the beginning, or were too afraid of the financial risk involved in being a part of United Artists. But they were saved in 1924 by a producer named Joseph N. Schenck.
Oh.
You talked about him.
Yeah, that's the brother of Nick Skank as
Shank.
Karina Longworth.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's the brother. That's the one who met the famous actress on the boat, and is like, I want to start a film studio. That's Joseph.
Look, you think I listened to these episodes? I don't know who you're talking about. Is Karina Longworth a host on this podcast? I didn't think so. So Joseph M. Shank from 20th Century, who agreed to join them and help guide them, but just importantly, he brought with him his wife, sister, and brother-in-law, who were named Norma Talmadge, Constance Talmadge, and Buster Keaton.
That's right.
So suddenly they got even more star power that could fill the gaps and got a big hit in The General from Buster Keaton.
Is that a United Artists movie?
Yeah,
The
I mean,
General?
distributed by,
okay.
So that's a United Artists movie.
Okay.
He also managed to bring in Rudolph Valentino, who did not the Song of the Sheik, the Son of the Sheik. Rudolph Valentino did the sequel to his most famous movie for United Artists.
Okay.
Add to that The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and The Thief of Baghdad that Fairbanks did for United Artists, and then The Gold Rush that Charlie Chaplin did.
God.
And all of a sudden, United Artists had under its belt what turned out to be some of the biggest movies of all time.
Yeah.
I didn't quite want to say this, but like, I don't know if I've ever seen a Mary Pickford movie.
No.
I've maybe seen one, but like most of these names, they're like, and then she made Pollyanna.
Yeah.
What?
I've seen Pollyanna with Haley Mills.
But like,
I've seen Cinderella animated.
But the movies, The Mark of Zorro, Thief of Baghdad, Robin Hood, and The Gold Rush, that's huge.
Yeah, you hate women. I get it.
Okay, you read the subtext. But to help financially, Shank got their movies released internationally so that they could make money overseas. But he knew that if they really wanted to compete with the big boys, they would have to do what the big boys were doing. Mm-hmm. That made them want to leave the big boys in the first place.
Right.
They had to own their own theaters. So in June 1926, they formed the United Artists Theater Circuit and started building theaters around the country, which is where the United Artists Theater downtown, which we talked about so long ago, came from this, opening December 26, 1927 with Mary Pickford's My Best Girl. Again, no idea what that movie is. So Shank managed to stabilize the company, but they were still riddled with financial problems from the get-go for almost their entire existence. For their first 5 years, they only made about 8 movies a year, which was way too low for the time.
Right.
For the first 20 years of their existence, they only released 300 movies, as opposed to the other studios releasing about 1,000 movies in that same time frame. Imagine having that many. It's like Netflix, but you have to go to the theater. And just like Netflix, most of them are bad.
Yeah. And I try all of them.
Out of the 10 years of the 1920s, they were losing money for 6 of them. They sometimes had to get money from the theaters in advance to keep their funding going. And aside from financial woes, there were just woes that they had to deal with. They did not get along at all with each other. Fairbanks was always goofing off, and he was like grabbing people's legs under the tables at meetings. D.W. Griffith thought Douglas Fairbanks was an idiot with no talent, and he pretty much felt the same about Mary Pickford unless she was in one of his movies.
Right.
And Charlie Chaplin was obsessed with money. Like that, well, he was obsessed with a few things, but he could not stop thinking about a few things, but also mainly money.
Also, I remember, I don't know if you'll touch on this, but he was making his best movies for other studios other than the Gold Rush. And like Mary Pickford for a while was
not by choice, though. Like that he was still under contract.
Yeah. But like the other United Artists were watching him releasing great Charlie Chaplin movies and like, oh, that's weird that you're doing all these great movies and we're struggling every day and it's not a big deal. Like she did Pollyanna just to, like, she didn't want to do Pollyanna, but she did it just be like, we need money to come in.
You mean her greatest movie of all time?
Yeah, Pollyanna. Haley Mills is in that, right?
Charlie Chaplin was against Shank's plan to open their own theater chain, so he refused to help fund it, which was the beginning of the ideal of them all funding everything together falling apart. Like if you came into this that we're all funding the same things and you're saying you're not going to help fund this, like what are we even doing here? Griffith actually left the company in 1924. He was not around that long. Board meetings were contentious. Mary was adamant that even the lowest crew members on the totem pole were taken well care of, but in reality, this was functioning just like any other studio, and the people on top were making most of the money.
Right.
They were split between the balance of art and commerce, which still was light years ahead of the other studios where that wasn't even a debate.
Right.
Like art's been dead for 20 years.
We don't paint here.
So with Griffith gone and things kind of squeaking along with half the tires coming off the track, they needed even more help than just Shank could offer. So the next big name producer they brought in was Samuel Goldwyn, and following him were David O. Selznick, Alexander Korda, Walter Wenger, and Mr. Fingernail himself, Howard Hughes.
Hey, put him in a plane. Let's see what happens.
Some of these guys were totally independent producers with their own studios who just used United Artists to distribute and promote their movies they made, but others were parts of other major studios but could step away from them to release through United Artists with what they deemed prestige pictures that their regular studios wouldn't make. And I didn't know that this is what a prestige picture actually is. There's a definition. It's movies that are made knowing that they probably won't make a lot of money, but they'll be so critically acclaimed that it's going to give the studio that releases them more of a pedigree and make them more respectable for when they then release A Man in a Hat Buys a Turkey #2.
Right.
It's basically just like burning money, but so that you can make more money later on other things.
United Artists this summer presents A Touching Tale of a Man in a Hat.
And his Toiki.
Toiki #2, starring Jerry Lewis. Yeah.
And the whole Toiki family is here, and they're all played by D.W. Griffith. So around this era, United Artists was putting out movies like Scarface, Hell's Angels, The Scarlet Pimpernel, who's my Scar. I had posters of him up on my door.
I caught Scarlet Pimpernel in 1918.
They made The Private Life of Henry VIII, The Prisoner of Zenda, Little Lord Fauntleroy, which is what people called me in high school, A Star is Born, Rebecca, Spellbound, Stagecoach, Foreign Correspondent, and from Chaplin himself, City Lights, The Great Dictator, and Modern Times. These were all United Artists
That's
movies.
A great catalog.
Prestige. And now, The Prestige. It's a bunch of Christian Bale in a jar. I don't get it.
How many times did he kill Scarlett Johansson?
From 1932 to 37, they even released all of Walt Disney's Silly Symphonies.
Oh, really?
They had the rights to those.
Whoa.
They almost got Selznick to release Gone with the Wind through them, but he decided to go with MGM because he wanted Clark Gable to be involved in the movie. Chaplin and Pickford eventually sued him for doing so many movies for other studios, but he sued them back for being bad distributors, and he left the company, so that didn't go well.
No, you can still be friends after that.
You still want to go...
Do you want to go chili dogs or what?
The thing I do all the time. So while they were only releasing like 15 to 20 movies a year at this point, they were mostly all hit prestige pictures. That's why United Artists started being known as the Tiffany of the movie industry, not the singer, the Britney of the movie industry. And they were doing all this without having a filming lot or having people under contract. Chaplin had his studio, but that wasn't really theirs. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fair, and God help them if they stepped foot on his, that frog will come to life.
There could be gold bars on the lawn. I wouldn't go there.
How old are you? Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks owned an 18-acre lot at the corner of Formosa and Santa Monica, now across the street from the Formosa Cafe, that they called Pickford Fairbanks Studio, but they eventually renamed it United Artists Studio, but it still wasn't officially the studio of the United Artists. They just called it that. It was operated separately, but Goldwyn and Schenck did have offices there, which was a whole ordeal because Pickford owned the land, but Goldwyn owned the buildings, and Mary and Sam fought about literally everything. They couldn't even agree on what color to paint the buildings, so they just left them unpainted for years.
I'll show you.
And I'm going to draw this line down half the property.
I'm so not good at conflict. I could be listening to a conflict that happened over 100 years ago and be like, God, get away from me.
Can I go sit in the Formosa until this is over? Can I go wait for the Formosa to be built?
The trains will be here any minute. The train's coming right at me.
Now this is a movie. A prestige picture coming this fall from United Artists. A train.
A train right at you. What do you mean? Oh my God.
Schenck got sick of this all, and he left the company in 1935, at which point Mary herself became the executive in control of United Artists.
Why the United and United Artists under quotes?
The Divided Artists.
The Divided Artists.
But she did not handle it all that well. She had quit acting by this point, so this was her full-time job, but she lost the distribution rights to the Silly Symphonies, which is like...
That's such a cute sentence.
Yeah, the board meeting of Samuel Goldwyn berating her, you lost the Silly Symphonies?
You lost the Adorable Cuties?
What are we going to do without this Squeaky Time Playhouse?
Walt's there, Mickey's in a crib and he's rocking him, and Oswald's there and he has like a suit and he has his hands crossed on the table. So you're saying that...
He's whispering to Goofy, my client would like to say,
My client would like to slip on a banana peel by now.
Do you have a steamboat? He's getting a little antsy. He'd like to do something with his hands and hips. So as silly as this was, losing the Silly Symphonies was a huge blow to their finances. Samuel Goldwyn hated working with Mary Pickford, and the other two saying they weren't pulling their weight and were, quote, parasites drinking my blood.
Save it for the wedding speech.
Save it for when we release Nosferatu. Well, that's a rave review for Nosferatu. He left United Artists, Samuel Goldwyn, Goldwyn in 1940, but he was still on the lot, and he renamed the lot Samuel Goldwyn Studios, even though Mary still owned half of it, which did not make her happy. They eventually went to court over it, and it went up for auction in 1955, where Goldwyn outbid Mary for full control. And they went on this lot to film West Side Story, and also reshoots of the cantina scene for Star Wars were done across the street from the Formosa.
I didn't know that.
I could just imagine John Wayne here. What? Partner, what the hell is that tune I'm hearing?
I love Now, I like the part where it's a long time ago, but a galaxy far, far away. I don't know what's happening here. And what happened to my voice?
You keep that music down, partner, or you'll be dead. Use that. Use that.
Use that line, yeah.
So it's still there now as the lot. It's right across from Formosa. Back to the late 30s. The wheels are coming off yet again for United Artists. Not helping matters was when Douglas Fairbanks went and died in 1939. So now it was just Mary Pickford, who was fighting with everyone, and Scrooge McDuck Chaplin trying to keep this crazy artist-run movie studio afloat, which by this point was really just any other movie studio. They were just studio heads.
Yep.
And also, well, she wasn't, but he was still like a movie star and a director. In most ways, they had become the beast that they were fighting against to begin with. So much so that in 1948, when the Supreme Court issued the Paramount decrees to break up the Hollywood monopolies, the 8 studios that were called out by name were Paramount, 20th Century Fox, Lowe's, RKO, Warner Brothers, Columbia, Universal, and United Artists. So even recognized by the High Court of America, they were the bad guys.
I know we're doing everything wrong and everything we've hated and sworn against, but come on.
It's not me.
We're the good guys.
On top of that, post-World War I, where movie crews were turned into bullets, the movie industry as a whole was kind of slowed down because while the public had a lot more money to spend on entertainment, there were not as many crew members or materials left standing to make these movies as there were 5 years earlier.
Right.
What this led to were more and more independent producers because they weren't tied down to any of these flailing studios, and also more banks were willing to loan money to make so-called independent movies because the form was kind of tried and true at this point. United Artists was able to use all these new independent producers, but it also diluted their prestige brand for the sake of keeping the lights on. By the early 50s, United Artists was not in good shape. In 1951, Mary had lost her management power, and in 1955, Chaplin cashed out for good, and then in 1956, Mary did the same thing. So, stepping away from Mary Pickford for a little bit, now the big four are all gone, and United Artists was now being run by Paul V. McNutt, who was the former governor of Indiana before he left after a year and turned it over to being run by 2 lawyers, Celino and Barnes, named Arthur Krim and Robert Benjamin. And as awful as that sounds for a movie studio to be run by 2 lawyers, they turned United Artists into the powerhouse that it's now remembered as.
Really?
Like the good years of United Artists were pretty much under them. To start, they bought the rights to all the pre-1948 Warner Brothers movies and formed the United Artists Classics division, which brought in a ton of money showing these movies on TV or in small theaters as revival showings, and also seems to be the first time a studio made like a subdivision of themselves that specialized in a certain niche, like Sony Classic, I guess they use Classic, like Fox Searchlight.
I think Searchlight is their thing. Yeah.
They brought even more money in 1957 when they listed the company on the New York Stock Exchange. But other than just cash grabs, they ushered in a new era of creativity by giving the producers that worked for them an unprecedented amount of autonomy over their movies. It was so appealing, it sucked in big name people who wanted to make deals with them, like John Wayne. I'll make a better movie than those war stars.
Who, Leslie? What's his first name again?
It's like Shirley or something.
Yeah. Leslie, you can't be serious. I am serious, and don't call me Leslie.
I am serious, and I'm gonna shoot you so that nobody knows. Speaking of neck, Gregory Peck.
Oh, Gregory Neck.
Frank Sinatra, who probably had people strangled by the neck. Bob Hope, who had a big thing on top of his neck, his nose. Kirk Douglas, Otto Preminger, Stanley Kramer, and William Wyler all made deals with United Artists. By 1966, they were the biggest movie distributor in the world. And during the 50s to the 70s, some of the movies they put out were High Noon,
great.
The African Queen,
great.
Some Like It Hot,
great.
The Apartment,
great.
The Magnificent Seven,
I haven't seen it. I've seen The Seven Samurai. And I've seen A Bug's Life. Does that count?
Have you seen The Ridiculous Six? It's kind of like that. I think it might be based on that.
I've seen the Under 10-8.
West Side Story, which I insist that you see, and you refuse to see it. They filmed it on the lot where they reshot the cantina scene, Greg.
Greg, if you listen closely, you can hear them play.
My sharks don't like you. I'm wanted in 12 slums. The Defiant Ones, Judgment at Nuremberg, The Vikings, Birdman of Alcatraz, In the Heat of the Night, Marty, which I also say, I always tell you to watch, 12 Angry Men,
Great.
Midnight Cowboy, the sexiest movie I've ever seen, Annie Hall, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Rocky, A Hard Day's Night, and launched both the James Bond and Pink Panther franchises. Was United Artists during this period.
That's crazy. A quick sidebar?
Yeah. Who's the Pink Panther?
There's no panther in the movie.
But another thing that I went into, just like the Day of the Locust and so many other things, like
the Hour of the Wolf was the other one that made me so mad.
I went in. I can't wait to see the Pink Panther I know from cartoons in this movie, and then I watch it. I'm like, he's right here from the beginning. He's doing the titles, and then no more Pink Panther. It was just a gem or something.
They really should have called it the Pink Gem if they want to keep kids mad. I rewatched 12 Angry Men because I was holding that it's one of my favorite movies, one of the best movies.
Very good.
It's very good. I watched it with this movie has so much F-wording integrity. It's so good. It's so smart. And they get to the end and it's like, well, the woman on the stand, she had the marks of glasses, but she wasn't wearing her glasses because all women are vain. And maybe the Italian kid didn't do it. And all the men are like, yeah. And I'm like, oh no, I backed this movie up.
We hate women more than we hate Italians. And now we are 12 happy men, except for Ed Begley. But in 1967, the company was sold to the Transamerica Life Insurance Company. And by the late 70s, such a romantic story of Hollywood.
Some of the best movies ever made. They sold it to a dentist and he ended up turning it into a company that makes a weird thing for a car.
And from A Hard Day's Night, they went straight into the life insurance game. And by the late 70s, the friction between Transamerica Life Insurance Company and Arthur Krim led to Arthur Krim taking 4 executives with him and leaving to form his own production company, Orion Pictures. So that was, don't you remember Orion? Orion
No,
Pictures. If you watch a lot of 80s movies, which I hope you do, their logo is the
Orion.
stars.
It is Orion. Sorry. Give me 1 second. This is what I heard you.
He's drawing on the board.
What you said was...
I was not speaking of someone from Scotland.
You were talking about Orion's belt.
Where the galaxy is in Men in Black.
RoboCop.
This set the stage for the most notorious moment in United Artists history.
They made RoboCop.
Okay, so the most notorious moment in United Artists history, Heaven's Gate. Not that one.
Not the one from the guy who did the Deer Hunter.
Yes, the one from Deer Hunter, not the cult.
Not
the cult where everybody dies. But then, yes, that one. I remember learning about this repeatedly in film school. I went to a certain school in the Valley.
What'd you do with your degree from film school?
I did 100 episodes of all 100 episodes have been leading me to the history of a company that I still don't quite understand. But that was the whole thing that I remember from United Artists was Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate. And I was like, where do I sign up?
They give you special shoes and you get
I believe in this comment. So it was a movie about Wyoming in the late 1800s that was just as big of a disaster as the cult was.
The Deer Hunter was so good that they were like, you can do anything with any amount of money.
So
and he's like, okay.
Michael Cimino, Deer Hunter, aka the Deer Hunter. Before that, he was a TV commercial director. So he had a habit of doing multiple takes of things, which is fine for a 30-second commercial with quick cuts. But for an almost 4-hour movie, you can't do that.
Right.
Like you don't have the time and money. He was obsessed with details and he took forever. He made the actors learn how to roller skate, which I think everyone should know. In the first 6 days of filming, they spent $900,000 on what ended up being a minute and a half of usable footage. After 2 weeks, they were basically spending $1 million per minute of usable film for this movie.
Oh my God.
There were echoes from the very beginning of United Artists history at this time that the lunatics had taken over the asylum. So it was almost a bookend of how United Artists...
It was a Greek tragedy like premonition.
Yeah, it was Chekhov's lunatics taking over the asylum.
The person who said that was a witch on a mountain with no eyes. Should I have taken that warning?
She had one eye, but she shared it with her sisters. It got a ton of bad press, and by the time it was done, it was supposed to have cost $7.5 million, had been budgeted at $11.5 million, and ended up costing $44 million.
Oh my God.
They shot over 1 million feet of film, and it made only $12 million at the box office. So the popular narrative is that this was the movie that ended United Artists, but that's not true because Transamerica owned them and they weren't going to be felled. The Transamerica, I think, you know that pointy building in San Francisco?
Yeah.
That's Transamerica.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they're not going to be brought down by Heaven's Gate.
No.
Maybe the cult. What it did change was the obsessive urgency that Hollywood now has with opening weekend box office profits. It's because Heaven's Gate was so financially damaging that like
now
every movie has to make. Yeah, they're obsessed with it. But it did embarrass Transamerica enough to sell United Artists.
Okay.
So now United Artists was bought by a guy named Kerkorian. It went to him in 1981, then emerged with MGM in 1983.
That's how I know him, because he bought MGM.
He's the M in MGM. From here, it's just a story of changing hands and being folded in and out of other studios and a few scattered hits. They did Rain Man in 1992. They were bought by Credit Lyonnais and became a small art house producer that did Bowling for Columbine, Hotel Rwanda, and Capote. In 2006, Tom Cruise took it over with the idea of bringing it back to its roots with the Big Four, but all he did was release Lions for Lambs and Valkyrie before it got reabsorbed by MGM.
I wanted Valkyrie to be good.
I didn't see it, but I agree that I wanted it to be good, and I heard it wasn't, and I believed it.
Yes.
Its current form started in 2018, United Artists, as a joint, not Valkyrie. We're not trying Valkyrie again. It didn't work the first time. It started in 2018 as a joint venture between MGM and Annapurna, known as United Artists Digital Studios. All this to show that no matter what the intentions of an artist is, the studio system always seems to win in the end over art. Case in point, they also made Hot Tub Time Machine.
Oh, I didn't know we were going to sit here and hate on Hot Tub Time Machine.